The 2024 Supercar season has finished with a bang, quite literally, because I'm recording this shortly after the Sunday action has wrapped up, and there is a lot to digest. But in my usual round review style, I picked three main things to chat about. We can only just scratch the surface of everything that went on in one video, so let's hop into it. So that was a pretty weird weekend, wasn't it? We seem to have way more heart-in-your-mouth moments than we would normally like to see in terms of accidents. We had some big shunts in Stadium Super Truck, Super 2, of course some of the other support categories, and notably in Supercars as well. And I'm just really pleased that everyone by and large is okay. Obviously Richie Stanaway had a delayed concussion, which is probably the most serious injury I've heard about this weekend. But yes, I do feel like we got a little bit lucky with the size of some of those accidents this weekend. And that brings us to the first main discussion point I wanted to cover, which was the decision, a really controversial decision in my opinion, to call qualifying after that huge turn 8 shunt on the Friday afternoon. Cameron Hill went in the wall very hard and ended up strewn down the back straight, and then Davey Reynolds actually had his own accident, repeating the same mistake, hitting the inside curb, if not the wall in fact, on the right hand side, and that also sent him ricocheting down the road. His car actually ended up partly on top of Hill's Camaro at the end of all of it, but fortunately they all seemed to get out okay. That had some pretty serious implications for the whole grid though, because Motorsport Australia weren't able to run that session that afternoon. They simply ran out of time, but crucially they decided not to try and attempt to redo that qualifying on the Saturday morning. That meant that the grid was set by the lap times people had managed to get in, and there were also people in the field that hadn't managed to set what is deemed a competitive lap time, and as such, their grid position was determined by their practice 1 and practice 2 times combined. That for me was where things got a little bit frustrating. For me, if you've got half the grid being judged by one session and another half of the grid judged by another, it really does scream out to me that they should have found some sort of solution to run that quali again. And given Supercars had practice 3 scheduled the following morning, it seemed like the opportunity was there. I'm sure you have to delve deep into the rulebook to really verify what is correct and what's not, and there's a bit of debate about that, but for me, I really wish they found a way to run that session again. In fairness, I do see where the other side of the argument is coming from though. The team should be aware of the risks of a street circuit, especially during a fairly short qualifying session, and maybe we should tip our hats and give props to those that assess that risk and actually went out and set those times very early on. It kind of reminds me about Formula 1 in Monaco. That banker lap is so important because you just never know if you'll get your final flyer in. Sunday also got off to a rough start with Jackson Evans having his own huge shunt at turn 8. Luckily he was okay, but unfortunately the car was not, and it did not make the start of the final race of the season. Just as well, he was out the firing line after a morning like that though, because the grid went absolutely nuts. There was so much happening in that race today. It was very scrappy, but to be honest with you, that's how I like my supercars racing. They're touring cars. At the end of the day, I like seeing the drivers get their elbows out, and there was plenty to talk about. The focus was, of course, at the front though. It was on from the very start with Brock Feeney off the line side by side with Chaz Mostert. I thought Feeney would have walked away in the opening seconds of that race because Chaz Mostert nearly stalled it on the start line, but somehow managed to recover some straight line speed and went side by side through the center chicane. They went very hard and it was very entertaining to watch. Mostert prevailed through the staircase section, which set us up for a good high intensity battle through the first half of that race. It all unfortunately started to go downhill during the pit stops though, when Chaz Mostert and Feeney pitted at the same time, and Red Bull, in a rare mistake, actually executed an unsafe release. There was pretty substantial contact between Feeney and Mostert in the pit lane. Feeney actually pulled to the side to try and redress the situation, but as I strongly suspected, he got a 15-second penalty for that, and I think that was justified. The purpose of an unsafe release penalty is exactly that. It's an unsafe situation if you've got cars making contact in the pit lane. It's not so much about someone getting an advantage over another driver, so I didn't think he'd get away by pulling to the side. It was a big shame because it seemed like the battle for the win was pretty much over at that point, but little did we know there was more drama coming in the next few laps. Feeney, driving very angrily, made a lunge at Mostert despite having his 15-second penalty and took the leader out of contention for the win. Mostert had big damage after going into the wall, and that led to the biggest question of today's race, which is, should Mostert have defended, knowing that Feeney had those 15 seconds to serve. Now for me, I definitely see both sides of the argument, but honestly, I feel like Mostert was quite right to defend that position. There was only about 10 laps left, which yes, it's unlikely Feeney would have been able to pull out a 15-second gap in that time, but given the pace of the Red Bull and the risk of tyres falling off the cliff for Mostert, you never know. I think he definitely deserved to put up somewhat of a fight. Add to the fact there could have been a late safety car, which would have allowed Feeney, if he was in the lead, to back Mostert up and potentially come under threat from the other drivers. There's many reasons why I think Mostert was quite right to try and hold his ground. And regardless of where you sit on Mostert defending or letting Feeney go, ultimately, regardless of his penalty, it's up to Feeney. It's his responsibility as the overtaking driver to execute the move cleanly. And unfortunately, he didn't do that. He put his hand up for it, quite rightly so, and did go and apologize to Mostert straight after the race. So it was just one of those unfortunate racing incidents. I think the red mist just came down a little bit for Feeney. It sort of reminded me of the desperation that crept in for Randall at the Simmons Plains event this year, just where it's looking so good, then it slips away and they try just a little bit too hard to rescue a result. And that, of course, leads us to Brown. He wrapped up the championship on Saturday, and just as well because he found himself backwards after contact with Kostecki early on during today's race, and that meant he had to put on a big comeback drive, and he did exactly that. He had so much pace in that car. He performed some great clean overtakes, and the only part where he really got lucky was that final position for first, obviously, after his teammate had contact with Mostert. It was a great, energized way for him to finish his championship year. He performed a fantastic burnout for all the fans on the front straight. I must admit, I never sit on straights when I go to a Supercars event. Adelaide is the one place where I might give it an exception just because of that champion burnout. And I do want to acknowledge just how much grit that Chaz Mostert showed today, despite that afternoon going downhill very quickly and carrying a lot of damage on that Mustang. He put up such a fight to hold his position on the podium, and I'm glad he rescued some sort of result after what would have been a frustrating afternoon. I'm running out of daylight here, so I'm going to fly through some of your thoughts. One of the lines I want to pick up from Dweller's comments here is it was a dramatic race today with all the action that defines V8 Supercars. And yes, for all the drama and controversy that's come out of Sunday's race, I do think we need to step back and celebrate the action and the entertainment that was on show today. The season in 2024 hasn't always been the most exciting, but they've finished on a high. And yes, I very much enjoyed the action in today's race. Second comment here from Chris mentions that Turn 8 was unforgiving. It certainly was. In fact, there's been some discussion if the safety of Turn 8 should be revisited given some of the accidents we've seen this weekend. For me, I definitely, absolutely always for increasing safety in the sport. Never want to see anyone get hurt, but at the same time, I do believe Brock's old quote that good racetracks have consequences. So I definitely wouldn't want to see anything done that removes this corner from the map or changes the essence of it in terms of it being one about bravery and commitment from the drivers. But if anything can be done to improve its safety, of course, that should be explored. One of the solutions I've seen mentioned is Supercars exploring NASCAR's safer barrier system that's better at absorbing those side-on contacts that we often see on the exit of Turn 8. That's an example of a solution where you can improve its safety, but still keep what we love about that part of the racetrack. And then the final comment here from Curry Pie was after I asked you guys for your weekend rating, and he said, if someone gives this a 1 star, then racing probably ain't for them. Yes, it was a thoroughly entertaining weekend. A few scary moments, of course, but overall, so much action for us to enjoy, whether you're into your supercars, your support categories, or some of the off-road stuff that they introduced this year. The Adelaide 500 just always seems to deliver, and I'm getting very tempted to try and make my way over there this time next year. And with that, 2024 is done. I want to finish up by saying a huge thank you to all of you for your support of the channel and me this year, especially with some of the recent delayed content. You've been so patient as I've dealt with equipment failure, and I'm going to spend the summer upgrading some of that equipment, including the camera, to bring you better quality videos in 2025. I'm also working on a survey to get your thoughts on different aspects of the channel and some ideas I have to improve in the years ahead, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And of course, I'll still be producing content during the off season as we build up for a big 2025. In the meantime, treat people like your trackside. Thank you again for all your support in 2024, and I'll see you in the next video.